Part one of our dissection of the offensive pass game is going to be a fun one, Brian. And look, there's reasons to be optimistic, obviously, for this pass game. And we kind of sort of touched on them a little bit in the open, but we're going to get a little bit of a deeper dive. And then, of course, there's some unknowns or some concerns that we have going into the season as well. And we're going to talk about those too. But let's start with the glass half full, Brian. And let's start with our optimistic, why we're optimistic about this offensive pass game. And I think, let's be honest, it all starts with the guy calling the plays and the coup that Marcus Freeman made by bringing in Mike Denbrock and what he brings to the table and his long-standing history in offensive game planning and offensive play calling at his last two stops and what they've been able to do.
Really the last three stops.
Fair enough.
You know what I mean?
Fair enough. But bringing in Mike Denbrock was
Yeah.
just a huge move that just makes everybody who thinks offense and wants Notre Dame to win just kind of gives them a sigh of relief and some excitement.
Well, I'll say this, Vince. Part of the reason that I have optimism is because the last time Notre Dame was actually good on offense against the best teams they played was with Mike Denbrock. So I gave you the numbers where they were barely over 200 yards against the top teams on the schedule. If you go look at the three Notre Dame played three top five teams that year in 2015. They passed for 321 yards in a last-second loss to Clemson. They passed for 234 yards, 9.4 yards per attempt against number 3 Stanford in the last-second loss. And by the way, part of the reason they only, quote-unquote, only passed for 234 yards is because they ran for 299 in that game. Okay? And then against Ohio State in the postseason, they threw for 284 yards. So, and then you look at the other, I would say the best teams in the schedule. They threw for 313 yards against Texas. They threw for 262, 10.5 per attempt against USC, and then threw for 299 yards against Temple, who if you remember, had a great defense that year. So that was the last time Notre Dame was really good, was the last year that Mike Denbrock had full control of the Notre Dame offense. Right. That's the last time we saw this offense in big moments be competent. And the reason they weren't better as a team is because they had one of the worst defensive coordinators in the history of Notre Dame football and in college football at that time. And now you don't have that problem because Mike Denbrock's going to have a far better sidekick. Mm-hmm. And honestly, it's partly why they had the success they had at Cincinnati in 2020, 2021, because you had strengths on both sides of the ball. Obviously, Marcus Freeman being the defensive coordinator in 2020 at Cincinnati when they went undefeated and almost beat Georgia in the Peach Bowl. Cincinnati was 9-0, 10-0 that year. Only loss was in the Peach Bowl to Georgia. A lot of people thought Cincinnati should have got into the playoff over Notre Dame. I don't agree. But they go to the Peach Bowl against Georgia and they lose by 2 points, I think, 2 points in that game. And so those things help, Vince. Those things help a ton. And when you look at Mike Denbrock, he's got that track record of success. And even at LSU the last couple of years, their offense wasn't always good.
Right.
And you're never going to always be good. Sometimes you're going to have those games where your offense doesn't light the world on fire. Even as good as that 2019 offense was against at LSU, they still had a game where they beat Auburn 23-20. You're going to have those days. But when you look at LSU, Vince, even last year, the offense was not the problem in big games. In their loss to Florida State, they had 459 yards of offense, 7.2 yards per play. In a road loss against top 10 Mississippi, Ole Miss, they had 637 yards of offense, 8.5 yards per play. In a road win over a top 10 Missouri team, they had 533 yards, 8.1 yards per play. In a road loss at Alabama, they scored 28 points, had 478 yards, and averaged 8.2 yards per play. That's what they did last year. Same thing the year before. First game, not great. Against Florida State, you go for 348 yards, 5.4 yards per play. It wasn't great. And then you go out against Mississippi State. You have 417 yards, 5.6 yards per carry. They're a ranked team. Play a ranked Tennessee team. You get smacked, right? Threw the ball well. They couldn't run the ball. Threw for 300 yards that game, but couldn't run the ball. Then you play an Alabama team. You score 32 points. You have that great drive at the end. You average 5.6 yards per play. And you have 549 yards in a postseason loss in the SEC title game against Georgia. 7.6 yards per play. So by and large, way more often than not at LSU, Mike Denbrock's offenses were good no matter who they played. And that's going to be a key. And so, we're going to find out if he can build that same thing at Notre Dame, right? Because he's going to have a completely different type of roster. He won't have a Jaden Daniels. He's going to have Riley Leonard, different players.
Sure.
He doesn't have Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas at Notre Dame. He's going to have good receivers, but not that. But the LSU didn't have a Mitchell Evans and didn't have a Jeremiah Love and I don't even think had a Jadarian Price, honestly. So there's going to be some differences to what they do, but he's shown in his career he can win with different type of offenses. So, why, right? Attention to detail is going to be greater. Mike Denbrock is an aggressive play caller without being too aggressive, right? They're going to throw the ball down the field, but they're not a team that throws the ball down the field 100 times. It's just we're always going to be looking for that opportunity to beat you deep and scheme you to beat you deep. Brings a nice blend of scheme to the table. Horizontal stretch, vertical stretch. He's really good at creating isolate. He understands the importance of creating, isolation matchups, right? Where we're going to use this formation, this alignment, move this guy here, do this with motion because we want to get this guy matched up right here in this look, in this particular situation. And so those are things you look at and say, he's bringing that type of experience and talent to the table. And he's also someone who's shown a willingness and ability to alter what the strengths are based on what he thinks his team strengths are. So if they got a great line and they can run it on people, he's going to run it on people. If he doesn't think he has the advantage in the trenches, he's going to game plan in a way that negates that lack of advantage. And he's going to do it a lot of different ways. So you're bringing in a guy with a proven track record in those moments. I mean, Jared Parker showed last year, give me the better team and I'm going to rip you up.
Sure.
But Jared Parker didn't have the experience or the ability last season to go out there and do that when the talent wasn't pro Notre Dame or the coaching wasn't pro Notre Dame. And those are things that you won't, for example, I'd be shocked if Mike Denbrock takes Audric Estime off the field on that last drive. Not after one carry. Things like that just are that savviness. Look, man, I know what our game plan was coming in, but right now I'm watching this. We are leaning on them. We are pushing them off the ball. We're going. And if he would have taken Audric Estime off the field, probably would have been in a pistol or under eye situation, and you're just running duo downhill. He's not trying to run some misdirection thing to catch him off guard, that type of stuff, which is what happened on those two plays that Ohio State blew up. Those are things that you look at, Vince, and say that's what a veteran play caller is just going to have that feel for the moment.
Sure.
And Mike Denbrock's been in a lot of big moments like this in his career. He's coached in title games, national title games. He's coached in Fiesta Bowls. He's coached in the college football playoff. He's coached in all these types of situations, Vince. SEC title games, huge moments in big crowded stadiums. He's had some failures in those moments. He's had some successes in those moments, and they've all led him to where he is now. So I think that more than anything is the biggest reason for optimism for me. And I like Tommy Rees. I like Jared Parker. I've defended them more than most the last couple of years. But the reality is this is the biggest reason for optimism, because I'm not confident that those two coaches would have been able to get the most out of this roster. I just said potentially they can, but I don't know that they can. Yeah. With Mike Denbrock, you just kind of assume it's going to happen because he's just shown he can be that guy over the last 10 years.
Speaking of the roster, yet another reason to be optimistic is a player that you mentioned during the Mike Denbrock talk, and that's Riley Leonard and what he brings to the table as a high level, championship level type quarterback. And that, as you are well aware, when you're calling plays, having good players certainly helps. And having a signal caller like Riley Leonard, and again, when we talk about this stuff, we are anticipating, health and all of those things. And so I just want to put that as a caveat.
Sure.
Just because I know how some people are. I mean, I've got the chat off, but I understand. Oh, he's the injury. We're not going there.
Haven't had that yet.
Okay,
far.
Good. Yeah. Okay, good. But we're talking about Riley Leonard and what he has been able to do on the field when healthy. And he's a championship level quarterback. And so, again, bringing in Mike Denbrock, you've also brought in Riley Leonard. He's going to be a huge part of the passing game this year, and it's a very big reason to be optimistic.
Well, when you look at Riley Leonard, Vince, you look at a kid that took over at Duke for a team that the year before went 3-9,
Mm-hmm.
and in the 3 years before he arrived went 10-26.
Sweet.
Before his injury against Notre Dame, right? And I'm gonna include the Notre Dame loss, but past that, he had led Duke to a 13-5 record in 18 games, right? 18 games. Where in the 3 previous years, in 3 full seasons, which was 36 games, they won 10. Now, Mike Elko's arrival had something to do with that. And Mike Elko's a heck of a football coach. But Mike Elko doesn't go 9-4 in 2022 if he doesn't have Riley Leonard at quarterback.
Right.
Now, what I don't know is how Riley is going to be in the state. Riley hasn't played in front of 112,000 screaming, Texans, right? I mean,
it's true.
But he also has never played with the kind of town around him that he's going to have at Notre Dame either. But you can't look at what Mike Denbrock's done with his last 2 quarterbacks and not get excited about what might be coming to Notre Dame this season, because you look at what he did, obviously with Jane Daniels, we know what he did there. But even Desmond Ridder, I mean, Vince, I was never a Desmond Ridder fan. Still am not a Desmond Ridder fan. But that's a kid that threw for over 3,300 yards this last year with Mike Denbrock, 30 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. And I don't even think he's that good. And just I look at it now and I'm thinking, dude, like you give a guy like Riley Leonard, Mike Denbrock calling plays, and you're going to feel a certain way about what you think he can be, because
right.
Riley's the kind of kid that can put a team on his shoulders and carry them to victory. But at Notre Dame, he doesn't always have to do that, right? Like, that's the difference. It's like, dude, we don't need you to go out there and be Superman to beat every team we play every week. I mean, you just watched last year when he got hurt, that offense just could do nothing the rest. Even in games where he played but couldn't run, the offense could do nothing. At Notre Dame, it's like, dude, you're going to have to be that guy. You're going to have to put the cape on sometimes. If we're going to win a championship, looking at, if I'm looking at it I'm a coach talking to Riley, hey, we're going to need you to put the cape on sometimes. We just are. There's going to be a game where our defense doesn't have it that day like they normally do, or our line doesn't have it, or our receivers or whatever. That team is just on fire, and we're going to need you to put the cape on and win this one for us. But it's not going to be every week like it was a lot of times at Duke, where if Riley didn't play well, then not only did the offense not do anything, they couldn't win.
Exactly.
And he won't have that kind of pressure, but he does have the ability to do it. And with Sam Hartman, I think in some ways Sam gets a bit of a bum rap for how last season went, partly because of his own, some things he did, but a lot of it is, Sam Hartman was never a quarterback that you went and signed and said, okay, he's going to put this team on his shoulders and carry you to victory. Sam Hartman's the type of quarterback that's always dependent on people around him doing their jobs. I'm going to get you the ball where it needs to go to, but you got to do your job. You got to block for me. You got to run the route. You got to catch the ball. And when his players weren't consistently doing that last year, I think he lost confidence in them and in himself.
Yep, completely agree. He looked like a different player the second half of the season. He just did. Right. He carried himself differently. And it was a lack of confidence, no question about it.
And it was confidence around what's around him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Where he couldn't put that team on his shoulders and say, let's go. Now, he did it that one time against Duke, right? Everyone does it every now and then. But it's not something where he was going to consistently make a living, going down and just saying, okay, I'm going to run around. I'm going to make this play. I'm going to throw this bullet. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. That's not who Sam Hartman was. And they didn't recruit him to be that.
Right.
To be honest with you. And so you can't fault him for that. But you didn't recruit Riley Leonard to be that. And then you went out and put some pieces around him that are very impressive. And that's obviously the next part of what we're going to talk about.
Good. Man, that's like a professional transition. That was well played. And so you are absolutely correct that the pieces that came in around Riley Leonard are a huge reason for optimism. And it's not just the pieces that were brought in. It's also some pieces that were already here. And we're talking about the wide receiver unit. And when you take pieces that were here and you add it in with the pieces that have arrived, then this is about the deepest wide receiver room as honestly as I can remember, Bryan, and you're so much better with the history than I am, but This is
Just
a
pure
deep
talent.
room.
I don't remember.
This is a deep room.
Yeah,
I mean,
I don't remember that. Yeah.
there have been years in the past where, we're talking about, a 6-man rotation. Maybe they expand it to 7 or maybe even 8 at times, this year. And it's like, okay, who are those 6 or 7, 8 going to be? Because there's some serious battles for those spots. And in the past, it was like, okay, who's going to start at wide receiver? Because I'm not sure they're much deeper than that, to be honest. You know what I mean? So it's just a different scenario.
And you are always in those situations where, and we've talked about this before, we don't need to talk about too much, but you're always in situations where if the other team could shut down the tight end, or if your guy that you thought was going to be your guy didn't pan out or got hurt, you were in trouble.
Yeah.
2022 was, boy, they really need Lorenzo Styles to step up, and he didn't, and it's hurt the whole unit. And when you look at you look at 2021 and you look at Kevin Austin, when Kevin Austin was really good, that offense was really good. When Kevin Austin struggled like he did against, he was terrible against Cincinnati. And guess what? Offense completely disappeared because you were almost entirely dependent on your Minnesota football on whether or not Kevin Austin was ready to step up and play well. 2020, I mean, you had good receivers, but you didn't have guys that you were going to go out there against Bama and they were going to win. And you just didn't have that type of team. And partly in 2020, the issue was you thought you were going to have Kevin Austin that year, and he got hurt, and couldn't play. You add Kevin Austin to that receiving corps of Ben Skoranek and Javon McKinley and a focused Kevin Austin, we might be talking about something then with Michael Mayer at tight end and Tommy Tremble and Brock Wright and all that. But he got hurt, and all of a sudden, boom, you're out. But that's the whole point, though, Vince, right? One injury could completely derail that team, those teams. One guy not performing well could completely derail those receiving corps. Now you're not in that situation. I mean, you're really not. So, I mean, you could right now, my projection for the starting lineup, just as of today, based on what we've seen in practice, is Chris Mitchell at Z, Jaden Greathouse in the slot, Jaden Thomas in the boundary.
Yep.
Right. If you lost all 3 of those guys, you'd have a starting lineup of Jordan Faison, Jaden Harrison, and Bo Collins with KK Smith, Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, and Logan Saldate, and Deion Colsey coming off the bench. Like, that's basically been their receiving core in previous years, but not with as much speed. But you still have those guys. So, I mean, you're talking about right now, your third string wide receivers would be probably KK Smith, Jaden Harrison. And the reason I'm going this way is because Jordan Faison has kind of playing both.
Yeah, he has. And
I would assume that right now, like Jordan would go out to Z if Chris Mitchell got hurt full time, as opposed to KK. But pick one. But for now, I'm just going to go with the way it is now. But you'd have KK Smith playing Z with Cam Williams as his backup. You've got Jaden Harrison playing the slot with Logan Saldate as his backup, and you've got Micah Gilbert in the boundary with Deion Colsey as his backup. That's if you lost your entire first 2 lines of receivers. That's basically what last year's receiving core was, Vince.
Pretty much.
And so when you look at it now, you're talking about you do have Chris Mitchell, you do have Jaden Greathouse, you do have Jaden Thomas, you do have Bo Collins, Jordan Faison, Jaden Harrison, KK Smith, Micah Gilbert, Cam Williams, and Logan Saldate, Deion Colsey. I mean, it's hard not to get fired up about that, Vince, because why? A lot of talent, a lot of depth of talent, a lot of different type of talent. What's something that we complained about last year? I know Ryan and I talked about this. I don't know that you and I talked about this a whole lot because we don't do as many shows during the season except for post games. But you had a bunch of guys that kind of all did the same thing outside of Chris Tyree and Tobias Merriweather.
Yeah.
Like Rico Flores, everybody, they all kind of did the same exact thing. This year, you have a much different group from a diversity of skill set standpoint. They're not all slots, and some of the slots have to play outside. You've got some size to them. Now, Tobias was tall, but Tobias was skinny. He wasn't a muscle guy. Bo can be a little bit of that, especially when Jaden Thomas got hurt, right? And so you had all those aspects to this year's receiving core. And last year, honestly, Vince, it's like, if Tobias and Jaden Thomas don't step up, your receiving core is in big, big trouble. Tobias didn't step up for whatever reason. We can debate whether he was given a shot or didn't. It doesn't matter. The fact is the end result was the same. Whatever you whatever you blame for why Tobias wasn't better last year is irrelevant because the result is the result, right? Jaden Thomas gets hurt again, and he's not healthy. He goes through a month and a half where he doesn't catch a pass. And the whole receiving corps just got jacked up when that happened. This year, you're in much better position to where if you have an injury, it sucks, but you're fine. Just keep rolling. And so it's that margin for error is so much greater this year. And also in past years, if you had really good guys that could cover in short area, this pass offense struggled because you couldn't stretch the field the same way. You didn't have guys that could get off pressure. You didn't have big bodies. The fact that they have different types of receivers this year allows them to attack defenses differently depending on what the strengths and weaknesses are of those teams. And all those reasons are when you look at this receiving core is just another reason why the expectation is I think this receiving core has a chance to be really, really good. They have a lot to prove, Vince, but they have a chance to be really, really good.
Another aspect of the pass game that isn't always an aspect of the pass game, but it definitely will be this year, and it's the weapons that are going to be coming out of the backfield. And obviously, specifically Jeremiah Love, and we have discussed this, a bunch in the offseason about how he's been working at slot and he's been doing some different things and all of that. But, when you've got a playmaker like Jeremiah Love, you want to get the ball in his hands, and that is going to be a special aspect to this pass game where defenses are going to have to pick their poison, in my opinion. Are you bracketing some wide receivers? What are you going to do in the pass game? And then all of a sudden you've got Jeremiah Love matched up with a linebacker or a nickel or something along those lines. And frankly, I give the nod to Notre Dame in most of those scenarios.
Which Jeremiah Love out of the backfield big time.
Yeah.
And again, we've talked about how Mike Denbrock has shown an ability to utilize certain weapons. Well, you think about the Clemson game in 2015, and you think about it's raining. They're not able to run the ball. The offensive line couldn't get a push because they couldn't plant their feet in the ground because the field was so wet. And they're bracketing Will Fuller the whole game, and you're just like, dude, I don't know what we're going to do here. Well, Mike Denbrock figured it out, right? He started using Chris Brown a lot on crossers and overs and ripped off some big plays. But what was the play that really sprung things in that 2015 game against Clemson? It was a wheel route to his running back out of the backfield for a 50-plus yard touchdown. And that's what it was. And that's the thing that kind of sprung that game open. And if you look at CJ Prosise before his injury, in a 5-game stretch, starting with Clemson and ending with Pitt when he got hurt, he had 20 catches in 5 games. And he had a 100-yard performance against Clemson. He had 56 yards against Navy, and 32 yards against USC. He had 43 yards catching against Temple and 29 against Pitt. In a game, he got knocked out in the first half. So in 5 games, he had 20 catches for 260 yards in 5 games. Because that's when he was started to get real comfortable as the starting running back. That's not normally what Mike Denbrock has done in the past. He didn't use the running backs a ton out of the pass game last year. However, what did they do to start the season off? They ran a bootleg throwback to the running back for a 50-something yard gain against Florida State in the first play. I think it was first play of the game. So he'll use it, but when he's got a guy that can be that kind of weapon out of the backfield, he will build the offense around it. And you started to see him doing that with CJ Prosise. Why? Because CJ had that unique skill set. 6'1", fast, former receiver, very athletically very similar to Jeremiah. And so you'll see him doing that. But then also you've got Jadarian coming out of the backfield as a unique weapon, as more of a traditional running back. And those are things, Vince, that kind of say, okay, that's just more weapons. And dude, we're not even going to spend time, honestly, talking about the tight ends because that's the one given.
Yeah.
Seriously.
You can be optimistic about it. That's fine.
But that's not they're going to be better now because of the tight ends. They've always had good tight ends.
Right.
The tight ends are going to be good this year. It's
correct.
Can the tight ends be complemented effectively, or even they become the ideal situation for Notre Dame? I don't care how good your tight end is it they're the complementary weapon to your receivers and other guys, not the other way around. And even when Tyler Eifert's your tight end, you still want to have a Michael Floyd. And it's not a coincidence that Tyler Eifert had his best statistical year during a season not when he was the number 1 weapon. He had more production in 2011 as the number 2 weapon than he did in 2012 as the primary weapon. because then teams couldn't focus on him as much. And I'm going to back that up. That's not just an opinion. In 2011, Tyler Eifert had 63 catches for 803 yards and 5 touchdowns. That year, Michael Floyd was your top guy. He had 100 catches for 1,147 yards and 9 touchdowns. The next year, Tyler Eifert had 50 catches for 685 yards and 4 touchdowns because he was the number one weapon. And it's easier to take a tight end out of the game than it is. It's easier to take Tyler Eifert out of the game than it is to take Will Fuller out of the game. It's just the way the defense works. I'm not saying Will Fuller is a better player than Tyler Eifert. That's just a reality of it.
Sure.
So your tight ends are already strong. Your tight ends were strong last year. Your tight end's not the reason you lost Ohio State. He was brilliant against Ohio State. You know what I mean? Like Mitchell Evans was great against Ohio State. I mean, he when you're down 14-10, he catches a big long pass down the field against Louisville, but it comes back because you have an illegal hands to the face by your offensive lineman, drive stalls. Right? Their problem last year and during that stretch of bad offensive play events was not Mitchell Evans. Because that was when he was at his best, was during that stretch of football. It's because what was around him wasn't good enough. So tight ends set. It's the other stuff that starts to get excited about how good this group can be, because you don't need Mitchell Evans to be Hercules this year. He just go do your job.
Right.
Right. And sometimes you're going to have to carry the load because you're getting one-on-ones. Other times, if they're trying to stop you, that's cool. Get your 2 catches for 30 yards and make sure you're down there celebrating with all your teammates when we're scoring all those touchdowns to other people. And that's just the way that it's going to be. And that's what gets you fired. That's, to me, Vince, is what kind of has me so fired up about what this team can be this year. It's not just Mike. It's like, I don't care how good of a coach you are. Don't care. If you don't have dudes, you don't have dudes. I mean, I pointed this out before. In 5 years as a coach, I coached 2 All-Americans and 7 all-conference players in 5 years. All of them could play. My job was just, okay, you've got dudes, get them coached up, get the most out of them, right? I mean, you can't take players that are mediocre and say, okay, we're going to go win a national championship because you're a phenomenal coach. You're going to win more games than you otherwise would, right? But you're not going to – I mean, Kyle Whittingham, Mike Gundy, Vince, I think you and I both agree are great coaches, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Have they ever even been in the conversation
Never.
for a national title? Sniffed. I mean, you had the 1 year with Mike Gundy in 2011, that one freaky year where I actually thought they should have played for the title. Outside of that, Mike Gundy's had 1 year where his team competed for a title. Kyle Whittingham's had 0. Why? Because he's getting the most out of the team, but the team still isn't talented enough, and the program's not capable of going and winning to that next level. And so, yes, it's great to have Mike Denbrock. It's wonderful to have Mike Denbrock and Mike Brown and Dylan McCullough and those guys, but you still need the dudes. And I think this year they're much in a position where you feel like they do have the dudes.
Those are our reasons for optimism here for the past game offensively. And frankly, I'm super optimistic, but come on now, we all have to be realistic as well. And as optimistic as we are, there are also, reasons that we have to talk about the question marks or, reasons. I don't want to say for pessimism, because that's not the right term, but, concerns. There are things that, we don't know the answer to, and we are going to find the answer out together. And one of those one of those concerns is the offensive line and pass pro. And, it became a larger concern with the news of Charles Jagasaw going down and not being available for this season, and them having to find an alternate left tackle, right? And so I think pass pro still would have been on this list, but it might not have been as big. Maybe it would have fallen down a little bit in the ranking, but it is at the top of the list for me, and I think it is at the top of the list for you as well, Brian. It's the pass pro. We just don't know what that's going to look like, and we don't know who the starting 5 is going to be at this point. And so it's a question mark right now, for sure.
It is. I mean, and it starts there, Vince. It's one of those things where what's the one thing, if all the things we talked about are true, is there anything that can stop this unit from being as good as it can be, and it's this right here.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the big moments, against A&M, I'm not worried about it against Miami of Ohio.
Sure.
I'm not worried about it against Northern Illinois. I'm worried about it against Texas A&M. I'm worried about it against Louisville. I'm worried about it against Florida State. And then when you get to the postseason,
sure,
USC, with their improved defensive line. That's the thing is if they can't protect the quarterback, then no matter how good your quarterback is, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to have trouble winning the biggest games. You're going to have trouble winning if that's the case.
Absolutely. And I am, like I said, it is a bigger concern than it maybe once was. And I think they'll probably get it figured out. The biggest question mark for me and the biggest concern for me is, will they get it figured out enough that it does not affect them in a negative way in week one? That's my biggest concern right now. It's week one, and can they operate at a high level in the pass game with the pass pro being a big part of that in week one? I just don't know the answer to that. And and I don't know if we're going to know the answer to that until we see them run out of the tunnel and strap it up during week one on the road in College Station. I just don't know if we're going to have the answer to that.
I don't even know that we're going to fully have the answer in that game.
And that's fair.
Because that's fair. It's like, because we're talking about, what are we talking about here, Vince, right? We're talking about the ability to kind of put this whole thing together. Can you protect the quarterback? Can you make the big plays? Can you get the ball down the field? Can you do all those things that go into being a successful pass offense, right? That's what we're talking about here. Well, yes, it's great if you can pass pro against Texas A&M, but as I've said, just because you play well one week doesn't mean you play well the next. I mean, Notre Dame's offensive line looked like world beaters against Ohio State last year. Well, I shouldn't say that's hyperbole, but they were very good against Ohio State.
They were very good. That was their best game. Yeah.
They were as good as they were against Ohio State. They were even worse than that against Duke the next week, and they were bad against Louisville. So it's going to be about doing it consistently. And then the other thing too is if the offensive line can just hold their water, I think Notre Dame should throw the ball, because I don't Texas A&M's deep secondary is a little bit shaky.
Yeah.
It's solid, but that's it. It's just solid. So it's the A&M game at least gives you a taste.
Sure.
And if you can't do it against A&M, it doesn't mean that you won't do it against Louisville. It is the first game of the year. And I want to push back a little bit on this notion of we're going to know everything we need to know about this team in the opener.
Right.
It's still the first game. And that's true either way. I mean, if Notre Dame goes out and beat A&M by 30, that's a huge win. It's a perception win. It's a big win, but it doesn't mean that that's what Notre Dame is going to be when they play Louisville. It doesn't mean that that's what Notre Dame is going to be when they play Florida State. I mean, we've seen those games before, Vince. I mean, we watched Notre Dame go out there and beat Clemson by 3 touchdowns when they were a top 5 team 2 years ago. That was 3 weeks after they lost at home to Stanford, who hadn't beaten an FBS team in over a calendar year. Right? But it does give you a taste, in my opinion, of where you are. And that's big, the big thing for me. And for Riley Leonard, one of the big things for him is, can he make the big throws in those big games?
Sure.
That's going to be a question. I'm not as concerned about that in the opener, because throwing the ball down the field requires a level of timing that takes time to work on. He may miss some shots then, but at some point soon, he's going to have to start figuring out, hey, can they get here? Can they get here? Can they get here? Can they get here?
Right. Those
are things that are going to have to be factors. And then, of course, as we talked about, Vince, when you talk about it, it's what does it all lead to? It's what you said. It's, can you do it when it matters most? And can you do it consistently when it matters most? Can you put all it together
right
when it matters most? And there's no way for us to know that answer till November.
Right.
Right. Like, because again, 100%. If they do it against Texas A&M, that's great.
That's great.
What if they don't do it against Louisville again?
Right. Exactly.
What if they do it against Louisville, but then don't do it against Florida State and USC? What if they do it against Florida State and USC, but then, when they get in the postseason, they don't do it in the first round of the playoff? Or, you know what I mean? Like it's going to have to be more consistent. And we won't really know until we see them play multiple good teams next year. Because, I mean, dude, if you go back and listen to some of our shows in September last year, and there's and look at our chats, there's people talking about why is Hartman not getting more Heisman Trophy love? I mean, seriously, and I'm okay, and it wasn't nuts to say that because again, I mean, you're the starting quarterback at Notre Dame,
and you're putting up good numbers.
You're putting up huge numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, he put up 254 in the opener. He put up 194 in game two because he only played a half. He completed 82.4% of his passes. He went for 286 against Central NC State on the road in a 45-24 win over a ranked team, and then threw for 330 yards against Central Michigan. Dude had 13 passing touchdowns and had 2 rushing touchdowns, so 15 touchdowns in 4 games.
Right.
Look great. And then it kind of just
then it didn't.
So it's we're gonna get little there's gonna be certain gauges along the way.
Oh yeah, milestones for sure.
That's a much better way of saying it. Yeah. It's milestones. You say, okay, yeah, you passed that one and you're doing this, that's good.
Right.
But now it's what comes next. So if Riley Leonard comes out in the first 4 games and he's lighting the world on fire, it's like, all right, that's great. But is it any different than Sam Hartman doing that last year? Is Texas A&M that much better than what NC State was last year? We don't know the answer to that. They weren't last year.
Right.
And say, yeah, but they got freaky athletes. And they don't know. Texas A&M isn't anybody's freakier of an athlete than what Peyton Wilson was at NC State.
Oh, that linebacker?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no kidding.
So I mean, those are different things you look at and say, okay, let's see what he can do. So yeah, first month is great, but it's like, okay, but you've got to keep it rolling, man, because we could go back at different periods of time. That 2017 offense from the Michigan State game, actually, it was from the second half of the BC game until the Wake Forest game was one of the best stretches of offense I've ever seen at Notre Dame. Yeah. And they were averaging over 45 points a game, Vince, and they were running for 300 some yards a game. I mean, they were absolutely ripping people up. Do you remember that stretch? They scored 49 against BC, 38 against Michigan State, 52 against Miami of Ohio, 33 on the road against North Carolina with your backup quarterback, 49 in a game over a highly ranked USC team, 35 against North Carolina State in a 21-point win, and then 48 against NC State. And offensively, you're in that stretch from BC to Wake Forest, their lowest rushing yardage game in that period of time was 182 yards, was their lowest rushing a total. The next lowest was 318. And that 182 yards rushing was against Michigan State, who that year the number 2 rush defense in all of college football. I think they gave up like 70-something yards rushing that year. I mean, it was absolutely nuts how good that, how highly ranked that Michigan State rush defense was. And there's only 2 teams that could run the ball on them all year. Notre Dame and Ohio State. That's it. Michigan State gave up 95 yards rushing that season. Notre Dame almost doubled that. And did that with Josh Adams, Dexter Williams missing over a chunk of that game because they got hurt, and Tony Jones missed the entire game. They played the last quarter and a half of that game with Deion McIntosh at running back, and they still couldn't stop him. But then what happened? Miami came, and then that team was never the same.
Right.
So
no doubt.
It's not about do you do it in stretches. It's can you be that team all the time?
Absolutely.
All the time. That's the key.
Bryan, that's going to do it for this part of our talk, the offensive side of the ball and the pass game and all of that fun stuff. And so before we move on to the next part, make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share with your family and friends. And of course, jump on the boards, boards.irishbreakdown.com for all of the breaking news and excitement that there is around Notre Dame football. You will not be disappointed.